Hello, and thank you for attending our session, Technical Services Workforce Preparedness, a survey of librarians' perceptions on LIS curricula and skills acquisition. My name is Catherine Smith. I am the head of metadata and archival processing at the University of Alabama Libraries. Joining me today for the presentation is Lindsay Lowry, Coordinator of Acquisitions and Electronic Resources at the University of Alabama Libraries, and Alice Daughtery, Associate Dean for Collections and Technical Services at the University of Alabama Libraries. Please take a moment to review the Code of Conduct for the Charleston Library Conference. You can see the full text by following the QR code on your screen now. This presentation will review the findings of a survey of academic librarians in a technical services position. The survey was designed to measure participants' perceptions of how well their LIS graduate coursework prepared them for their current careers and to identify the specific areas where they have had to seek out additional training in order to be successful. An article presenting the quantitative portion of our findings was published in the Journal of Academic Librarianship earlier this year, and we anticipate publishing a second article on the qualitative data collected through the survey in the coming months. We will begin the presentation by reviewing the background and impetus for the study and the survey design. We have then broken our discussion of the results of the survey into two sections. Data collected from the quantitative questions, which focus on education and employment history, important skills for technical services librarians, and the effectiveness of coursework versus continuing education, and data collected from the qualitative questions, which were designed to elicit more detailed feedback from survey participants regarding the most valuable skills they acquired during their formal LIS education and the skills they wish they had had the opportunity to learn. The American Library Association lists the master's degree as the terminal degree for professional librarians, and the vast majority of employers require an ALA accredited master's degree for professional positions in the field of library and information science. There are many options for on-campus or face-to-face, fully synchronous and/or asynchronous online courses, or a blend of both. Many graduate programs also offer areas of concentration for students to customize their learning experience and specialize in a particular field of librarianship, like academic librarianship, children's librarianship, law or medical librarianship, archival studies, reference studies, and others. ALA and its divisions have repeatedly affirmed that the master's degree is the appropriate terminal degree for a career as a professional librarian. So these programs often make up the vast majority of training that librarians receive before entering the job market. Obviously, there are individuals who have work experience prior to pursuing a master's degree, and many programs offer the opportunity for internships. However, these are not necessarily requirements for completing the degree, and individual experiences will vary widely. There has been a significant amount of scholarship targeting LIS education and how well it prepares librarians for their future careers. The article citations appearing on this slide all address individual aspects of librarianship, specifically within academic libraries, that have been traditionally ascribed to technical services units and span several decades. However, prior to our own study, we were unable to find any studies that reviewed career preparedness of LIS students for careers in technical services as a whole. As we will discuss later in this presentation, this is a significant gap in the literature because many technical services librarians hold or have held cross-functional positions that incorporate areas of responsibility from two or more specialties in technical services work. As we were formulating our research questions, it became necessary to develop a definition of what constituted a technical services librarian. The American Library Association defines a technical services librarian as specializing in, quote, acquiring, organizing, and preserving all kinds of library materials. The categories you see on the screen are all listed as common areas of specialization for technical services. However, professional experience and other published research show that there are more areas that may be folded into a technical services unit within a library, including assessment, discovery, government documents, interlibrary loan and/or document delivery, scholarly communications, systems, web services, and administrative roles. Additionally, depending on the institution, many librarians who work in technical services will work in one or more of these specialties as part of the daily course of their assignments. In order to accommodate the experiences of as many technical services librarians as possible, we chose to follow the ALA's broad definition of technical services librarians. Participant eligibility was based on 3 criteria. Each participant must have an MLIS, a Master's in Library and Information Science, or equivalent degree from an ALA accredited institution, must be employed in an academic library, and must be employed as a professional librarian in a technical services role, as defined on this slide. No attempt was made to differentiate between various types of, quote, professional librarians, such as tenure or non-tenure track positions, or whether or not the institution grants faculty rank to their librarians. The survey instrument, which was distributed via relevant library listservs after receiving IRB approval, was a Qualtrics survey that included multiple choice, Likert scale, short free text entry, and open-ended questions. The purpose of this survey was to measure librarians' perception of their preparedness for a career in technical services based on their formal LIS education, and so was designed to collect individuals' recollections and impressions based on their own lived experiences. While a very limited amount of demographic data was gathered for statistical purposes, no attempt was made to fact-check or verify an individual's reported experience. The 2 research questions that guided the survey are: 1. How well do librarians feel that their LIS coursework prepared them for a professional role in technical services in an academic library? And 2. What type of coursework and skills do librarians identify as being the most valuable in their current role? The questions focused on various aspects of each individual's educational experiences, such as the coursework they completed in pursuit of their master's degree, course format, areas of concentration, prior work experience, or internship opportunities, and professional experiences, such as the number of years that passed between completing their degree and attaining their first professional librarian job and/or attaining their first professional job in technical services, their areas of responsibility in their current roles, reliance on continuing education to supplement their formal education, among others. Following the design of the survey, and for the purposes of this presentation, we have divided the results section into discussions of the quantitative and qualitative data and results, respectively. I will now turn things over to Lindsay to speak about the quantitative data gathered.
Thank you, Catherine. For the purposes of our presentation today, we're going to look at data for 3 of the questions that we asked in our study that get at the heart of our overall research questions. Specifically, we asked what skills participants identified as being valuable to their current role, as well as to what degree coursework prepared them for their current role, and to what degree they have relied upon continuing education to supplement their skills. Next slide. Before we dive into the results of our questions, it's important to get a bird's eye view of our participants and their demographics. As Catherine said, in order to be included in the study, participants were asked to affirm that they held an ALA accredited master's degree in library and information science or the equivalent, that they were currently working in what they consider a technical services role, and that they were currently employed in an academic library. In total, the survey yielded 285 responses. The respondents were asked to indicate where they received their degree, and 59 different LIS programs were represented in the data. At the time of study, there were a total of 64 ALA accredited LIS programs, so our respondents represented a very good sample of all programs accredited by the American Library Association. The largest portion of respondents completed their degree between 2010 and 2019. And the majority of respondents, or 66%, reported that they did not have an additional degree, and about 40% of respondents completed their coursework in a face-to-face environment. Next slide. Participants were also asked to indicate their job responsibilities, choosing from a list of 14 different responsibilities common to technical services work. For this question, participants could select all options that applied, and 48% of respondents indicated having more than one job responsibility, often reporting between 2 and 4. In fact, the data reveal significant overlaps occurring between job responsibilities and acquisitions, e-resources management, and cataloging. The majority of respondents were also currently employed in publicly funded college or universities and had 10 or more years of experience as a professional librarian in a technical services role. Next slide. Now that we have an overview of our survey population, we can look at the questionnaire responses. Participants were asked about coursework they completed during their degree that directly related to the work in technical services that they do today. And for this question, respondents could also select more than one answer. 4 categories of coursework are listed on this slide, though more were represented in the data. The most commonly reported coursework taken that related to technical services work was coursework concerning cataloging and metadata, with 256 participants, or almost 90% of the survey population, selecting this answer. A large percentage of participants also reported taking a course on acquisitions and/or collection development. While it's not shown on the slide, only 2 participants reported taking coursework pertaining to interlibrary loan, and only 4 participants reported taking coursework pertaining to receiving and physical processing. Those 2 categories were the lowest. However, we've also included data here to show that discovery and electronic resources management and/or licensing accounted for very few responses to this question as well, indicating that coursework in these areas is not common for LIS graduates. Next slide. Participants were also asked what skills they identified as being the most valuable to their current role. The results of this 5-point Likert skill question revealed the important skills necessary to participants' current roles. Interestingly, soft skills, such as interpersonal communication and teamwork, were seen as extremely important alongside skills like electronic resource management, library systems management, and MARC cataloging. Next slide. Respondents were also asked to reflect upon their perceived level of preparation from LIS coursework for entering technical services employment. Answers here also utilized a Likert scale from not well at all to extremely well. While this table does not show all of the data, some interesting results are highlighted. When it comes to cataloging and metadata, respondents felt moderately well prepared for employment with their coursework. Recall from our previous slides how almost 90% of respondents indicated taking cataloging and metadata coursework while earning their degree. Conversely, with discovery and electronic resource management, a large percentage of respondents indicated that their coursework prepared them, quote, not well at all for discovery and electronic resources management and licensing. Next slide. Survey participants were also asked to what extent they relied upon professional development and continuing education in order to supplement their skills in technical services areas. We've once again only shown a sample of the data in our slide here, but in contrast to how respondents indicated that their LIS coursework prepared them not very well at all when it comes to skills in these areas, participants in the survey indicated that they relied a great deal on professional development and continuing education for electronic resources management and cataloging and or metadata management, and a moderate amount for acquisitions/collection development and discovery. However, the results of this question could be confounded by the availability of professional development in some areas. A future study may find some areas have greater representation in continuing education opportunities than others. Next slide. While the sample size of respondents did not reach a high enough threshold for us to draw generalizable conclusions, from this quantitative data, we can glean a few key takeaways. First, from the results of the data, we can see a trend indicating that librarians in technical services roles perceive their coursework as providing only minimal preparation for work in technical services. Likewise, it appears that there is a perceived mismatch between what librarians in technical services deem to be valuable skills and what skills were actually obtained during the completion of LIS coursework. Soft skills were rated as more important or just as important as those hard or technical skills needed to succeed in a technical services role. Finally, a large portion of respondents indicated reliance on continuing education and professional development to complete their skills in technical services areas. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine to talk about the qualitative results.
Thank you, Lindsay. The final two questions of the survey were open-ended, text-based questions that were meant to elicit more thoughtful and full answers from participants. The first questions asked participants to reflect on the skills or knowledge that they obtained while completing their degrees that they still use in their coursework today. The second question asked what area of technical services work they wish had been covered in their coursework in order to best prepare them for their current careers. Because of the nature of the data collected, the responses had to be evaluated differently from the quantitative data. Responses were loaded into in vivo and were independently coded by two of the authors, who then compared their results to resolve any discrepancies and confirm intercoder reliability. This process involved creating a codebook of topics as they were observed in the data, and then counting the number of references to those terms within the full data set. Because respondents frequently repeated or expanded upon individual topics of interest, such as cataloging or more specific aspects of cataloging, it was not uncommon for some topics or codes to be observed multiple times in a single respondent's answer. However, after reviewing the data, there was a very clear correlation between both the individual counts of observations of various codes to the number of respondents who brought up those topics in their responses. For the first question, responses varied widely. between individuals who felt that the majority of the skills and knowledge they obtained during their graduate studies were relevant to them in their current careers, individuals who felt that they gained valuable insights and understandings of librarianship, if not outright or explicit skill sets, and individuals who felt that they gained very few relevant skills for their careers at all. While very few respondents reported that they use nothing they learned in their LIS programs in their current careers in technical services, it was more frequently noted that few skills attained in these programs remain relevant to individuals today. The most commonly cited skills by a significant margin, reported by respondents as still being used in their daily work in technical services, were related to cataloging, primarily basic cataloging and cataloging schema. This was one of the first difficulties in coding these responses, as it was not entirely clear sometimes exactly what an individual meant when they referred to basic cataloging. Basic cataloging is a highly subjective term, so the coders had to make judgment calls about what would constitute basic cataloging versus more complicated cataloging, and many other instances of this type of potential conflict throughout the data set. Foundational concepts, which the coders defined as being related to the basics of librarianship, such as philosophy or the organization of information, were also frequently cited as being skills still utilized in their work today, as well as web programming and other systems-related skills. Just as we saw in the quantitative data, skills and knowledge related to acquisitions and electronic resources management were among the most infrequently reported benefits of having attained an LIS education. On your screen, you see a small selection of quotes pulled from the responses to this question. A frequent refrain was the idea that individuals, quote, learned how to learn or learned to become self-sufficient in learning, while others felt that the coursework gave them the very basic foundation upon which to build further understanding in either practical hands-on internships or other practical coursework versus learning on the job later in their careers. Second question in the qualitative section of the survey asked respondents to reflect on what aspects of technical services work they wish had been covered during their formal LIS education. The data gathered from the responses to this question were less clearly delineated than in the first question, which could be explained by the sheer number of tasks carried out in many technical services units. As Lindsay reported earlier, a significant number of respondents have worked for many years in technical services and therefore may have either had many responsibilities or may work in an institution in which they are required to take on responsibilities from various quote unquote specialties within technical services work. This question had a much higher count of observations coded as other, because they were specific enough to be potentially noteworthy, but may have only been mentioned by a single respondent, such as a desire to understand a very particular type of scripting or programming, the desire to learn a very particular type of cataloging, etc. The most commonly reported skills that participants wish had been covered during their formal education were electronic resources, specifically licensing and license negotiation, and systems and coding, specifically programming and APIs. Leadership and management, and acquisitions and budgeting were also frequently cited in the responses to this question. Another sentiment that emerged in these responses was the lack of hands-on practical experience. One respondent that I will quote here stated that in a job search, quote, people respect on-the-job training, networking, and experience much more than degrees or school, end quote. As you can see from some of the quotes that were selected to be included in this presentation on the slide now, many individuals felt that technical services work either were not offered, particularly for the specialization that they either find themselves in now in their employment or were pursuing while they were in school, or that times and technology have changed significantly since their time in school. Therefore, many of the things they learned when they completed their degrees are no longer applicable. However, the constant refrain in these responses was that there was the desire for additional practical, hands-on opportunities to work with the various concepts being discussed throughout their coursework. The main takeaways from the qualitative results, which, as I mentioned earlier, we anticipate publishing in an article to be released within the next few months, are one, that certain areas of technical services work are overrepresented to a certain extent in the LIS curricula, both in the quantitative and qualitative portions of the survey. Respondents overwhelmingly reported receiving some training in cataloging. But conversely, many areas of technical services work are vastly underrepresented in LIS curricula, seemingly particularly pertaining to electronic resources, budgeting, acquisitions, and licensing and license negotiation. After reviewing the responses, it also became clear that career paths to and within technical services for a librarian are not always direct. In school, individuals were not always certain of what specific field their work would take them into. While academic librarianship is a very common concentration offered by LIS programs, that concentration typically needs to address a vast number of areas of librarianship that fall into academic libraries, not just technical services. The overwhelming response that was taken away from the qualitative results is that practical experience is seen as being the key to success. Many individuals who had the opportunity to participate in or benefit from work studies, internships, or previous employment in technical services indicated that they were the key to both making the most use out of their more theoretical coursework and also gave them the most benefit when searching for a job later in their careers. Individuals who did not have the opportunity to pursue an internship indicated that that was one of their biggest regrets or one of their biggest concerns about their overall coursework experience. As Lindsay stated earlier, the data that we have presented here cannot be generalized upon in order to opine on the overall value of the MLIS degree for librarians pursuing a career in technical services. However, we hope that the data we have presented here will be valuable for people who are either seeking a career in technical services, currently working in technical services, or hiring individuals into technical services positions to better understand the overall breadth and depth of skill acquisition currently being trained in LIS programs. As I mentioned earlier, Our first article on the quantitative results gathered from the study has been published in the Journal of Academic Librarianship, and a pre-publication version can be freely accessed in the University of Alabama's institutional repository by following the QR code on your screen. Thank you again for attending this presentation.